For as long as humans have existed, we have been familiar with the process of constantly relocating from one place to another in search of favorable environmental conditions, survival, and prosperity. Approximately a century ago, the Great War that plagued Europe forced many of the continent's inhabitants to emigrate from their countries to avoid persecution and being caught in the bloody violence that ensued. Among the many destinations for immigration was Canada. There were many push and pull factors surrounding our nation that appealed and repelled Europeans as a safe haven. Canada itself experienced a mass of immigrants, which resulted in a negative change to all people as a result of expectations involved with the pull factors, a radical bias revolving around immigrants, and the discrimination that ensued upon immigrant arrival. During the era of the Great War, the world experienced a widespread dispersion of European populations across the world. Each migration destination had their respective appealing aspects for the migrating population. Amongst them, Canada had able farmland, which, with the increase in population, would create more job opportunities. This seemed to be a positive prospect to the naked eye at the time. Contrarily, created a lot of bias based on economic positions of immigrants. At the time, an immigration policy was already established by Clifford Sifton. He initially implemented bias towards immigrants considering what he desired and felt that Rwanda's artisans, shopkeepers, and laborers were not desirable immigrants, as they didn't make good pioneers and would increase the population of major cities, add to unemployment, create slum areas, and become a festering sore which will remain as long as Canada endures. Individuals in authority like Sifton, who demonstrated hierarchical bias, created tremendous pressure to those immigrants who were unfavorable and left them to struggle in the process of immigration. Not only were Sifton's desires unfair, but his hospitality was unwelcoming. This was reflected as he recounted, "I am indifferent as to whether or not he is British born. It matters not what his nationality is. Such men are not wanted in Canada, and the more of them we get, the more trouble we shall have." The lack of altruism and Sifton views were counterproductive. Instead of providing a safe home for refugees, they felt unwanted and alienated from the rest of Canada. Immigrants who came before Sifton established a policy also had to follow the policy. People with suspicion and hatred had rumors about their alleged espionage involvement spread as people suspected of sympathizing with the enemy could be arrested or searched. Many people labeled as enemy aliens were rounded up and sent to internment camps in remote areas. Those who looked suspicious were arrested because the Canadian government didn't want to take any risks by letting immigrants who were considered as spies run around the country. There were many push and pull factors that largely influenced the local and immigrant interactions in Canada. There were many push and pull factors that brought immigrants from the world to Canada, but Canada only wanted immigrants who were British. Immigration was an issue in Canada, even though the government promoted immigration since the 1920s, but the Canadian government was only looking for British immigrants. The changes in the immigration policy in 1919 that Sifton had established had echoed the feeling of xenophobia, as it became compulsory for immigrants to pass an English literacy test. Canada was only looking for immigrants who could be easily assimilated into a society. A large part of the population and the Canadian government, whether it was liberal or conservative, did not want any more non-British people in the country. This shows how non-British immigrants were discriminated. The immigrants had to pass a test to show that they can fit into the society. The Canadian government did not want immigrants except from England, as the Britishers had won them. Canadians had become more suspicious and less tolerant of foreigners and ethnic minorities. The Canadian government considered suspicious immigrants as spies. The non-British immigrants were locked down in labor camps. The men worked long hours and were poorly fed and clothed. The enemy aliens were forced to register with their local police and report on a regular basis. Over 9,597 enemy aliens were locked up in labor camps during World War I. They had rough conditions to live in. These were the reasons why Canada only wanted immigrants from British during the 1920s. We are known as a country who promotes equality, but back then it was different. Canada used to discriminate non-British immigrants. Discriminating someone makes them feel like he or she is not a part of the society and creates bitterness and hatred in the society. Our historical actions did not follow the underlying principle that all men and women were created equal. During the World War, Asians, which were mostly from China, Japan, and India, were the ones who were mostly discriminated in British Columbia. As recorded, they worked building railroads, mining, fishing, in sawmills, and in businesses. But all these groups faced racial discrimination. They were often paid lower wages than other workers for the same job and were excluded from most professions. They could not vote if they were born in Canada, and they could only find jobs within their community. This made the lives of Asians difficult to live in Canada as they were being discriminated. In 1927, officials in prairie cities complained to the federal government that many European immigrants were not staying in farms as the government intended them to do so. They were going to towns and cities for jobs, which led to unemployment. In addition, the government also limited to 150 the number of Japanese allowed to enter the country. The same year, the provincial Liberal government in British Columbia mentioned Ottawa to end all Asian immigration and to repatriate or send home as many Chinese or Japanese people as possible. Canada still accepted British citizens who want to migrate to the country. There was a lot of discrimination during this period that it was difficult for them to even get jobs. The oil companies, mortgage companies, financial stockbrokers, and most retail and mercantile companies, except the Hudson Bay Company, discriminated against all non-Anglo-Saxons. There was a possible solution. If they could beat the accent handicap, they could change their names. Caroline Zarnicki overnight became Chloe Kingston. Mike Robichaud became Martin Drake. And Steve Ziatkiewicz became Edward Dawson. The least they could do to get a job is to change their name to an English one. This is really unfortunate for the immigrants from other countries than England. In conclusion, Canada had an issue with immigration during the interwar period. The Canadian government promoted Canada as a land of opportunity, but Canada was only accepting British immigrants during the 1920s, and those who were non-British and immigrated to Canada were discriminated by the government in many ways. Canada had a large number of immigrants and had problems that involved with the push and pull factors and had heretical bias revolving around immigrants and discrimination that ensued upon immigrant arrival.